In the untamed wilderness of the Amazon basin, where survival hangs by a thread and death lurks behind every vine, a wildlife researcher's split-second decision changed everything. When she threw herself between a massive anaconda and a helpless baby gorilla, she thought her courage might save an innocent life. But what the enraged silverback father did when he discovered a human had touched his offspring would unleash a primal fury so terrifying it defied every rule of nature itself.
Before we jump back in, tell us where you're tuning in from, and if this story touches you, make sure you're subscribed, because tomorrow, I've saved something extra special for you.
Dr. Elena Vazquez had been tracking the rare lowland gorilla family for 3 weeks through the dense rainforests of Gabon, documenting their behavior for her groundbreaking research on cross-species adaptation. The morning humidity hung like a suffocating blanket as she crept through towering cecropia trees and tangled lianas, her camera equipment weighing heavily on her shoulders. She had no way of knowing that this routine observation day would become a nightmare that would test every limit of human courage. The attack came without warning, in a small clearing where the gorilla family had been peacefully foraging for wild ginger roots. A colossal green anaconda, nearly 25 feet of pure muscle and prehistoric hunger, had somehow traveled far from its typical wetland habitat deep into the heart of the African rainforest. Its massive olive-scaled body, thick as a telephone pole and marked with dark geometric patterns, moved with silent efficiency as it targeted the most vulnerable member of the group. Little Kito, barely 8 months old, had wandered just far enough from his family to become an easy target. The serpent's powerful coils wrapped around the baby gorilla's tiny torso like steel cables, each ring of muscle methodically compressing his small ribcage and cutting off his ability to breathe. His desperate chirps and cries pierced the humid air as his miniature hands clawed helplessly at the suffocating embrace. The forest, usually alive with the constant chatter of parrots and the rustle of countless insects, fell into an eerie, supernatural silence. Even the ever-present buzz of mosquitoes seemed to pause, as if the jungle itself was holding its breath, witnessing this impossible collision between South American predator and African prey that defied every law of natural geography. Dr. Vazquez watched in frozen horror from behind a massive buttress root, her scientific training warring with maternal instincts as little Kito's struggles grew visibly weaker with each passing second. Every moment of hesitation brought the innocent creature closer to death. Little Kito's world had collapsed into a nightmare of crushing darkness and fading breath. The 8-month-old gorilla, who should have been learning to swing from branch to branch under his mother's watchful eye, now found himself trapped in a living prison that tightened with each desperate gasp for air. His tiny chest, covered in soft black fur that still carried the sweet scent of his mother's milk, heaved frantically as the anaconda's coils compressed his ribcage like a slowly closing vise. The pain was beyond anything his innocent mind could comprehend. Each attempt to draw air felt like breathing through a crushed straw, and bright spots began dancing at the edges of his vision. His miniature arms, which had spent months learning to cling to his mother's back during their daily travels through the canopy, now felt impossibly heavy as he weakly scratched at the serpent's smooth scales. The python's body felt cold and alien against his warm fur, a creature from another world that had no business in his peaceful forest home. Kito had always been the curious one of the family group, the adventurous baby who wandered just a little too far while exploring colorful butterflies or interesting sounds. His mother, Amala, had constantly worried about his fearless nature, always calling him back with gentle grunts when he strayed beyond her protective reach. Now, that same curiosity had led him into a trap that his young mind couldn't understand or escape. As consciousness began to slip away like morning mist dissolving in sunlight, Kito's thoughts turned to simple comforts. the warmth of his mother's embrace, the taste of sweet fig juice, the security of sleeping curled against her massive chest while rain drummed on the canopy above. His bright brown eyes, usually sparkling with playful mischief, now reflected only confusion and growing fear as the world around him slowly faded to black. The most heartbreaking part wasn't the physical pain, it was the bewilderment of an innocent creature who had never encountered evil, now facing death without understanding why his safe world had suddenly become so terrifying. Dr. Elena Vasquez crouched behind the massive buttress root of an ancient mahogany tree, her heart hammering against her ribcage as she watched the horrific scene unfold through her camera's telephoto lens. At 34, she had dedicated her entire career to studying great apes in their natural habitats, spending months at a time in remote forests, documenting behavior that most humans would never witness. But nothing in her 7 years of fieldwork had prepared her for this impossible nightmare. Her weathered hands, scarred from countless encounters with thorns and rough bark, trembled as she adjusted her camera settings by pure instinct. Elena had always maintained strict scientific protocols: observe, document, never interfere with natural processes, no matter how brutal they might seem. Intervention could disrupt delicate ecosystems and compromise years of research data. She had watched leopards hunt, witnessed territorial battles, and documented the harsh realities of survival without ever stepping beyond her role as an objective observer. But this situation shattered every protocol she had ever followed. African lowland gorillas and South American anacondas inhabited completely different continents, separated by thousands of miles of ocean and millions of years of evolutionary divergence. This encounter should have been impossible, a collision of worlds that defied every principle of biogeography she had studied in graduate school. Elena's scientific mind raced through possibilities as precious seconds ticked away. Was this anaconda an escaped exotic pet? Had climate change somehow shifted migration patterns in ways no one had documented? The questions were fascinating from an academic perspective, but utterly irrelevant as she watched little Kito's struggles growing weaker. Her weathered hands, scarred from countless encounters with thorns and rough bark, trembled as she adjusted her camera settings by pure instinct. Elena had always maintained strict scientific protocols: observe, document, never interfere with natural processes, no matter how brutal they might seem. Intervention could disrupt delicate ecosystems and compromise years of research data. She had watched leopards hunt, witnessed territorial battles, and documented the harsh realities of survival without ever stepping beyond her role as an objective observer. Through the chaos of her racing thoughts, Elena suddenly became aware of another presence in the clearing. The adult gorillas, who had initially scattered in confusion when the anaconda struck, were now returning with growing desperation. Amala, Kito's mother, emerged from the dense undergrowth with movements that spoke of barely contained anguish. Her usually calm demeanor had shattered into frantic pacing as she circled the clearing, her deep brown eyes wild with maternal panic. But it was the arrival of Bomani, the massive silverback father, that transformed the entire dynamic of the crisis. The 400-pound patriarch crashed through the vegetation like a force of nature, his silver-streaked back catching filtered sunlight as he assessed the impossible scene before him. Elena had observed this magnificent male for weeks, documenting his gentle interactions with his family and his measured responses to territorial challenges. Now she watched those same intelligent eyes fill with a rage so primal it made her blood run cold. What happened next defied every expectation of gorilla behavior Elena had ever studied. Instead of charging directly at the anaconda, which would have been the typical silverback response to any threat against his offspring, Bomani stopped 20 feet away and began scanning the surrounding forest with methodical precision. His massive head swiveled as he searched the tree line, and when his gaze finally locked onto Elena's hiding spot, she felt her breath catch in her throat. Those dark eyes, usually reflecting the calm intelligence she had grown to respect over weeks of observation.
Preparing and narrating this story took us a lot of time, so if you are enjoying it, subscribe to our channel. It means a lot to us. Now back to the story.
Now burned with something far more dangerous. Bomani had spotted her, the only non-gorilla, non-snake presence in the clearing, and his expression revealed a cognitive leap that chilled her to the bone. In his primal logic, her presence at the moment of his son's attack couldn't be coincidence. Elena realized with growing horror that she wasn't just witnessing a rescue attempt, she had become part of the equation in Bomani's mind, and silverback gorillas were known to have long memories when it came to perceived threats against their families. The moments stretched like an eternity as Elena found herself caught between two impossible forces: the dying baby gorilla whose life hung by a thread, and the enraged silverback father whose suspicious gaze promised violence if she made the wrong move. Bomani's massive frame tensed as he processed her presence, his knuckles pressing into the forest floor as he prepared for what his instincts told him might be a coordinated attack by multiple predators. But then, something extraordinary happened that would haunt Elena's dreams for years to come. Little Kito, in his final moments of consciousness, managed to extend one tiny arm toward her hiding spot. The gesture was barely perceptible, weakened by the anaconda's relentless constriction, but its meaning cut through the clearing like lightning. The baby gorilla, through pain and approaching death, was reaching toward the only other presence that might help him. Amala saw her son's desperate gesture and followed his gaze to Elena's position. The mother's eyes, already wild with grief, suddenly filled with something that transcended every barrier between human and gorilla: the universal recognition of another being who might save her child. Her soft whimpers carried across the humid air, not as territorial warnings, but as the desperate pleas of a mother whose world was collapsing. Elena felt her scientific objectivity crumble completely as she watched this impossible communication unfold. Mother and child, both looking toward her with eyes that held no understanding of species boundaries, only the primal hope that help might come from any source willing to provide it. Even Bomani's suspicious posture shifted slightly as he witnessed his family's desperate focus on the human researcher. In that suspended moment, Elena realized she was no longer an observer documenting natural behavior. She had become an active participant in a life-or-death drama where her choice to act or remain hidden would determine whether an innocent creature lived or died. The weight of that responsibility pressed down on her shoulders like the human jungle air itself, demanding a decision that would define not just this moment, but her entire understanding of what it meant to be human in the face of another's suffering. Elena's mind erupted into chaos as 7 years of scientific training collided with something far more primal and human. Every protocol she had ever learned screamed against intervention. Researchers who interfered with natural processes risked not only their own lives, but potentially disrupted delicate ecological balances that had taken millennia to establish. Her doctoral advisor's voice echoed in her memory, warning that emotional decisions in the field led to disaster for both animals and humans. But the practical dangers were even more terrifying than academic consequences. That anaconda was a killing machine, capable of crushing every bone in her 5'6" frame, and she had no weapons beyond a machete designed for cutting vegetation. Even if she somehow managed to distract the serpent, Bomani's suspicious presence added another layer of mortal peril. Silverback gorillas could tear a human apart with their bare hands, and his protective instincts were already triggered by what he perceived as her involvement in his son's attack. Yet as Elena watched little Kito's tiny chest barely rising and falling, something deeper than survival instinct stirred in her heart. She thought of her own nephew back in Madrid, barely older than this baby gorilla, and how she would move heaven and earth if he were in danger. The sight of Amala's desperate eyes, so human in their anguish, so maternal in their pleading, created a bridge across species that no amount of academic training could ignore. Her weathered hands began to shake as she reached for the machete strapped to her belt. The weight of the blade felt both insignificant against an 18-foot anaconda and impossibly heavy with the responsibility of choice. Elena knew that stepping into that clearing would likely mean her death, but remaining hidden would certainly mean watching an innocent creature die while his mother's cries echoed through the forest. In that moment, scientific objectivity surrendered to something infinitely more powerful than protocol. The recognition that some moments demand we choose between who we are and who we might become, regardless of the consequences. With a movement that surprised even herself, Elena burst from behind the buttress root like a woman possessed. Her machete glinted in the filtered sunlight as she charged across the clearing, abandoning 7 years of careful scientific protocol in a single moment of desperate courage. The anaconda's massive head swiveled toward this new threat, its cold yellow eyes assessing her with prehistoric intelligence that had survived millions of years of evolutionary refinement. Elena's approach was anything but reckless. Her weeks of observing predator behavior had taught her that direct confrontation with a 25-foot anaconda would mean instant death. Instead, she began circling the serpent's position, shouting at the top of her lungs while waving her machete overhead. The cacophony of human noise in the usually peaceful clearing had an immediate effect. The anaconda's instinctive response was to prepare for multiple attackers, causing its grip on Kito to loosen by precious millimeters. But her desperate strategy carried a price that became apparent within seconds. Bomani, already suspicious of her presence, interpreted her sudden aggressive behavior as confirmation of his worst fears. The massive silverback exploded into action, his 400-pound frame charging toward Elena with earth-shaking strides that announced his intent to eliminate what he perceived as the primary threat to his family. Elena found herself caught in a nightmare triangle of death, the anaconda striking toward her legs with lightning speed, Bomani approaching from her right with fists capable of crushing her skull, and little Kito still trapped in loosening but deadly coils. Her military training from years spent in remote research locations kicked in as she dodged the serpent's attack while keeping the machete between herself and Bomani's advancing fury. The clearing erupted into primal chaos as 3 different species collided in a battle that defied every natural law. Elena's lungs burned as she screamed continuous warnings at the anaconda while trying to position herself for a strike that might free Kito without triggering either predator's killing instincts. Time became fluid as adrenaline transformed seconds into hours, and her entire world narrowed to the deadly dance of survival unfolding in the heart of the African rainforest. What erupted next was a battle between human intelligence, prehistoric killing power, and primal parental fury that shook the very foundations of the rainforest. Elena's desperate gambit was working. Her continuous noise and movement had confused the anaconda's hunting instincts, causing it to release another crucial inch of pressure around Kito's tiny torso. But the serpent was adapting quickly, its ancient brain recognizing her as the primary threat that needed elimination before it could secure its prey. The anaconda's massive tail whipped toward Elena's legs with bone-crushing force, missing her by inches as she leaped backward. In that same instant, Bomani's enormous fist swept through the air where her head had been moments before, the displaced wind from his strike rustling the leaves around them. Elena found herself dancing between 2 different types of death, the cold, calculated killing of the serpent and the explosive rage of the silverback father. But something unexpected began to unfold in this chaos of violence and desperation. As Elena continued her frantic assault on the anaconda, dodging and weaving between its strikes while keeping her machete raised against Bomani's charges, the massive silverback began to slow his attacks.
His intelligent eyes, burning with protective fury just moments before, started to process what was actually happening in the clearing. Elena wasn't attacking his son, she was attacking his son's attacker. The realization seemed to pierce through Bomani's primal rage like sunlight breaking through storm clouds. His massive frame hesitated mid-charge as he watched this small human female risk her life against a predator that could easily kill them both. The moment of recognition created a split-second opening that Elena desperately needed. The Anaconda, distracted by Bomani's sudden stillness, loosened its coils another precious degree. Kito's weak cries became slightly stronger as air finally began reaching his compressed lungs. But the window of opportunity was closing fast. The serpent's patience with these multiple threats was rapidly reaching its limit, and Elena's exhaustion was making her movements slower, more predictable, more vulnerable to the next devastating strike.
In a moment of pure desperation, Elena made a decision that defied every survival instinct she possessed. She threw herself directly at the anaconda's head, bringing her machete down in a precise strike that severed several inches of the serpent's tail. The blade bit deep into muscle and bone, causing the massive predator to release an ear-splitting hiss of pain and fury. The anaconda's reflexive response was exactly what Elena had gambled her life on. It released Kito completely to defend itself against this devastating attack. The baby gorilla tumbled free from the loosened coils, gasping and crying as precious oxygen rushed back into his compressed lungs. But Elena's triumph lasted only seconds. The wounded anaconda, now in a frenzy of pain and rage, whipped its massive body toward her with lethal intent. She barely managed to roll away as 25 feet of furious serpent crashed into the space she had just occupied, its jaws snapping shut inches from her face. Amala rushed forward and scooped up her precious baby, cradling Kito against her chest as she retreated to safety. The little gorilla's cries, weak but growing stronger, filled the clearing with the most beautiful sound Elena had ever heard. The sound of life refusing to surrender. The anaconda, realizing its prey was lost and facing multiple threats, began its slow retreat into the dense undergrowth. Its wounded tail left a trail of blood on the forest floor as it disappeared between massive tree roots, seeking the safety of deeper jungle where it could heal and hunt easier prey. Elena collapsed to her knees, her entire body shaking with exhaustion and adrenaline as she watched the serpent vanish into the green shadows of the rainforest.
Elena collapsed to her knees, her entire body shaking with exhaustion and adrenaline, believing her nightmare was finally over. But what Bomani did next was truly terrifying and completely unexpected. The massive silverback, instead of celebrating his son's rescue, began approaching Elena with deliberate, measured steps. His eyes burned with an intensity that made her blood freeze, and she realized with growing horror that her heroic act had triggered something far more dangerous than gratitude. In Bomani's primal logic, Elena's scent was now permanently linked to the moment his son nearly died. Silverback gorillas possess memories that span decades, and her presence during this traumatic event had marked her as a permanent threat in his mind. As he drew closer, his massive fists clenched and his chest began the rhythmic beating that signaled imminent attack. Elena understood that her courage might have saved Kito's life, only to cost her own. But then something miraculous happened that would redefine everything she thought she knew about gorilla intelligence and forgiveness. Amala, still cradling her rescued baby, stepped between Elena and her enraged mate. The mother gorilla's gentle eyes met Elena's terrified gaze, and in that moment, a communication passed between them that transcended every barrier of species and evolution. Amala extended one massive hand toward Elena, not in threat, but in the universal gesture of gratitude. Her touch, gentle as a whisper despite its power to crush bones, conveyed what words never could.
the recognition that this human had risked everything to save her child when she herself was powerless to act.
Up next, you've got 2 more standout stories right on your screen. If this one hit the mark, you won't want to pass these up. Just click and check them out. And don't forget to subscribe and turn on the notification bell so you don't miss any upload from us.